Hello, so this is episode number 6 of a narrative that I'm doing on the year 1625 to 1701. And in this episode, I'm covering the years 1678 to 1688. So lots happens here in this decade. And I think the one thing that's running through all of these things that go on in this decade is really the really great, in terms of significant fear of Catholicism that's running throughout England. I'm mainly talking about here. It's running through the country. So we're in 1678, and what has just happened is that we've had the Third Anglo-Dutch War. Charles and Parliament are kind of increasingly divided over religious issues, and into this period of quite significant kind of paranoia and instability comes Titus Oates. Okay, and Titus Oates, I don't have time in this episode. I might do something separate on Titus Oates. Is a somebody that you wouldn't necessarily trust, not necessarily a very trustworthy figure. Throughout his life, he's not really been hugely successful, and Titus Oates comes up with this kind of plot, or starts to spread rumors that there's a great kind of Catholic plot to get rid of the king and replace him with his brother James II, or James, the Duke of York at this point, who later becomes James II. So to replace Charles II with his brother. And Titus Oates starts to spread these rumours. And because of the great kind of like paranoia and fear of Catholicism at the time, despite the fact that Catholics were only about 1% of the population at the time, this really catches on and it becomes really, really significant. And turns into a kind of great moral panic of the day. So it just builds and builds and builds, and it becomes, it gets quite close to the king. It gets, significant people in Parliament are involved, and it leads to actually 35 people being executed. If you want to find out more about the Popish Plot, there's a really, really good In Our Time episode all about this that I'll link to in the in the description of this YouTube video. And this Popish Plot starts in 1678 and runs on until about 1681. So for 3 years, the nation is kind of caught up in this kind of anti-Catholic fervor, this significant kind of like anti-Catholic sentiment. As a result of this, we have in 1679 what becomes known as the Exclusion crisis. And this is when Parliament, some MPs try to pass an exclusion bill to stop the Duke of York, James, who later James II, from becoming king. And in this moment, this is when we get the emergence of political parties. We get the Whigs and the Tories emerging here in this exclusion crisis, because the Whigs are the ones who want to pass this exclusion bill. They want to, change the line of succession because they don't want to have a Catholic monarch. They are pro, religious toleration, pro power of Parliament. And then on the other hand, we've got the Tories who don't think it's right to change the line of succession, and they believe in the power of the state church, and the power of the monarchy shouldn't be kind of impeded. So we get the Whigs and the Tories. And before this exclusion bill is allowed to kind of pass through both houses of Parliament, Charles in 1681 dissolves Parliament. Charles II dissolves Parliament, and Charles II actually rules alone from 1681 to 1685. So it's all because of this exclusion crisis, which has come from the Popish Plot. And Charles is able to do this, to dissolve Parliament and rule alone from 81 to 85, because of the watered down Triennial Act following the Restoration. So because that had been kind of watered down, he's able to rule alone. Moving on now to 1683, we have the Rye House Plot, where it's a plot to kill Charles and James both by old Cromwellian soldiers, and replace them with the Duke of Monmouth. Now, the Duke of Monmouth is Charles II's eldest illegitimate son. And the Duke of Monmouth is also Protestant. So he's seen by a lot of kind of Protestants in England as he's the one that should come next, not James, Charles's brother, who's Catholic. And so there's increasing kind of calls to replace Charles with the Duke of Monmouth. The Rye House Plot doesn't succeed. And what this leads to is a period of really significant kind of like persecution of dissenters, because Charles starts to associate Whigs and dissenters with kind of opposition and this plot to potentially, assassinate him and his brother. In 1685, Charles II dies, and on his deathbed, he takes last rites as a Catholic, and so that's quite a kind of significant moment. James comes to the throne as a Catholic. James II comes to the throne as a Catholic. Now, James has got two daughters from his first marriage, Mary and Anne. And as we learned earlier, Mary is married to William of Orange. So Mary and Anne are both Protestant. James is Catholic, but they're from his first marriage, so they're both Protestant. And so the next in line is going to be Protestant if James is getting on. He's married to Mary of Modena, who's a Catholic princess, but they don't have any children. So the next in line is Protestant. So for the kind of political nation, the elite, the people who are holding the political power other than the monarch, people think, well, perhaps we can kind of cope with James for a little bit of time because the successor is going to be Protestant. Anyway, quite quickly after James comes to the throne, we have the Monmouth Rebellion. So that was who I talked about before. James, the Duke of Monmouth, Charles II's eldest illegitimate child, because Charles had lots and lots of illegitimate children, but no legitimate children with his wife Catherine of Braganza. So Duke of Monmouth starts rebellion, and thinks that he's going to land and it's going to in the country, and people are going to get swept up and join him in this rebellion against his uncle James. Unfortunately for the Duke of Monmouth, that it doesn't work out like that. People don't really want another civil war, don't want to support him, so he lacks the support and he gets crushed, and he actually gets beheaded at the Tower of London. So the Monmouth Rebellion 1685 doesn't succeed, and that's early on in James's reign. And this shows, I think, that there was some support for James at the start of his reign. Also in 1685, we have the revocation of the Edict of Nantes by Louis XIV in France. And this puts an end to kind of toleration for Protestants in France. So we get kind of a clampdown on Protestants in France, and it leads to over 25,000 Protestant Huguenots actually moving to London, which has a significant impact on the economy because a lot of them bring skills, particularly in things like weaving and the cloth trade. But what this means for politically is that a lot of Protestants in England, already feeling a little bit kind of tetchy about having a Catholic monarch, see what Louis is doing in France and think, could this happen next here? James, in 1685, to add to this increasing kind of fear, issues dispensations to Catholics where he says, Catholics can become army officers, for example. This links to 1686 in the Godden versus Hales case, which the judgment was that the king could override the Test Act and could therefore appoint Catholics into the army, into positions of power. So there's increasing kind of fear that James is opening the door to turning the country back to Catholicism. In 1687, James issues the Declaration of Indulgence, which gives freedom of worship to Protestant dissenters and to Catholics. And this is not taken too well by lots of people in the kind of political arena. In 1688, he reissues this declarations and forces bishops and ministers to preach it from the pulpit, that it has to be read out. 7 bishops were in 1688 now refused to do so, and there's a trial of these 7 bishops. They refused to read the declaration giving freedom of worship to Catholics. And they're put on trial, the 7 bishops, and they're actually acquitted. So the judge lets them off, so you shouldn't have to read this declaration. And this leads to kind of public a joy at this decision, that it's kind of, a kind of criticism almost of James's policy. So this fear of kind of like increasing Catholic Catholicism, I think you could say, is really kind of exacerbated in 1688 with the birth of James's son, birth of the Prince of Wales. Mary of Modena has a baby. Almost straight away, there's rumours that it wasn't really their child. It was brought into the bed with a warming pan, and it's kind of a conspiracy. But what this means is that there's a Catholic succession now. There's this young boy has been born. He's Catholic. He's going to be Catholic. That means the monarchy, the British monarchy, is Catholic, for the foreseeable future. So at this point, 7 peers, 5 Whigs and 2 Tories, write a letter inviting William of Orange, who is married to James's daughter Mary, and they are both Protestant, inviting William of Orange to that if he invades, that there won't be, people won't fight against him. Of course, James would not be happy with this, but and it's an incredibly kind of treasonous letter to write, but they write this invitation to William. They become known as the Immortal Seven for doing so. So William is kind of been expecting this, and he gets his troops together, a really significant force, and lands in Torbay. And before there's any kind of significant battle, James has a kind of breakdown. He has this nosebleed, and he eventually flees to France. And this becomes known as, and the subsequent events become known as the Glorious Revolution, which is really, really significant debate about that event, which I'm going to talk about in the next episode. Okay, thank you for listening.